The dust rose slow and steady on the sun-baked road outside Benson, Arizona. That same grit hung in the air like an old memory, clinging to everything it touched: wagon wheels, boots, the tails of horses, and the men who rode them. One of those men, well, he didn't ride like the rest. He wasn't built the same, didn't walk the same, didn't rope the same. But Lord Almighty, did he know how to handle a horse. They called him Oklahoma Pete Haverty. Not because he came from a long line of rodeo stars or because he had 2 strong legs planted in the stirrups. No, sir, Pete only had 1 leg. But he had a heart full of fire and a rope that moved like lightning. He was born back in 1895, when the Oklahoma Territory was still wild and uncertain. Before statehood, before pavement and gasoline, Pete entered a world shaped by dirt roads and cattle drives. When he was just a boy, tragedy came calling. Blood poisoning cost him his left leg, took it clean off halfway between hip and knee. It could have ended him, could have sent him down a path of bitterness and regret. But Pete? He didn't seem to know what self-pity even was. There were prosthetic legs around in those days, clunky and stiff, made of wood and iron. But they weren't easy to come by, not out in the territory. So Pete picked up a crutch and kept on moving. And Lord, did he move. By the time he was 10, he'd talked his father into taking him on a cattle drive from southern Arizona all the way up to Kansas. That trail hardened boys into men, and Pete came back changed. He wasn't just along for the ride. He had a calling. Now you gotta picture this. Pete on horseback, 1 leg in the stirrup, the other side balanced with a kind of grace you can't teach. He didn't wobble, didn't hesitate. His eyes would lock straight ahead. And when that calf bolted out the chute, Pete's rope flew like it had a mind of its own, smooth, clean, true. Then he'd swing down off that horse with his crutch, flip that calf, and tie it off before most men could even tip their hats. And folks would sit there in the stands, mouths open, not believing what they'd just seen. He just had a way with horses, his son Dell would say later, a mix of pride and wonder in his voice. He could accomplish anything, and I'm not sure how he managed to do it with just 1 leg. During the Great Depression, Pete took a job as a state livestock inspector out in Benson. He'd roll down dusty back roads in an old car, shifting gears and pressing the gas with that 1 good leg. His niece, Ruth Burton, remembered riding along, bumping down the trails, the horse trailer rattling behind. Almost every weekend, Pete hauled his family out to some little rodeo in some little town, because in those days, rodeo wasn't just sport, it was survival, it was spirit, and it was something Pete could win. Dell remembers summers when Pete would get invited to rope in Salinas, California. The organizers paid his entrance fees just to see him perform. That became the family's vacation. He just depended on winning something to pay for it, Dell said, and he always did. He didn't ride for the fame. He didn't rope for sympathy. Pete Haverty stood out because he never let the world tell him no. Where other men might have hung their heads or sat down in the dust, Pete climbed into the saddle and said, "Watch me." And folks did. They came from miles around to see the 1-legged cowboy show what grit and gumption looked like. He wasn't a loud man. He wasn't boastful. But he was steady. And back in those days, steadiness mattered more than showmanship. When he died at the age of 63, it wasn't his spirit that gave out. It was just the body. Years of dust, dirt, and determination had taken their toll. But he never once cried about it. Never complained. He faced life like he faced the arena, with his head high, a firm grip on the reins, and that same quiet fire in his gut. According to Dell, he had a good zeal for life. There was nothing he cried for or regretted. He just took everything as it came. And isn't that the kind of man the Old West was made of? Not the loudest voice, not the strongest build, but the one who showed up, who gave it all he had, and didn't back down, no matter how steep the hill or how fast the steer. Oklahoma Pete Haverty didn't set out to become a legend. He just stayed true to himself, doing what came naturally, roping calves, riding horses, and living life without excuses. He left behind more than ribbons or rodeo titles. He left behind a story, one that reminds us all that grit ain't in the legs, it's in the heart. So next time you hear thunder on the plains, or the sharp snap of a rope finding its mark, maybe tip your hat to Pete, because somewhere in that dust, the spirit of a one-legged cowboy still rides.